Hi, I'm Sita Rani Bryan, lifelong vegetarian and chef. With the growing awareness of how our food choices affect not only our health but our earth, more and more people are choosing to eat a vegetarian diet a couple days out of their week. With my family favorite recipes and vegetarian spin on cuisines from around the world, you'll see how eating vegetarian is never boring and a cinch to do 2 times a week. No meal is complete without dessert, so we're going to make my raspberry and white chocolate ganache tart. The raspberries are in season this time of year, making them delicious on top of our white chocolate ganache. The first thing I want to do is get started on my tart, because we need to let it cool overnight, or for 5 hours if you can't do overnight. That way the ganache will harden. And the first part of that is our tart shell. So I'm going to use cashews and rolled oats as part of the ingredients for the base of the tart shell. And that's because it helps give it a lot of body without making it too floury. And because these 2 ingredients have a lot of great health qualities, there's lots of good quality fat in cashews and also a bit of protein. And the oats are complex carbohydrates, so they keep you fuller for longer. It really makes this a nutritious alternative to your dessert. So I'm starting with ½ a cup of cashews, and I'm going to process them in my food processor until they become like a meal, because since this is replacing some of our flour, it needs to be a similar consistency. All right, and to that I'm going to add ½ a cup of rolled oats. So ½ a cup of cashews and ½ a cup of rolled oats into our food processor. And again, I'm going to process this a bit coarsely because I want it to get floury. Great. Now we are going to add some flour, but I'm using whole wheat pastry flour because it has more nutrition. It hasn't had all of its vitamins and minerals stripped. And pastry flour is finer than whole wheat flour that you would use for bread baking. So 3/4 of a cup, and I level it off with my knife because it's really important that your measurements are exact when you're baking. It's like chemistry. It's chemical reactions taking place. So if you just kind of eyeball it, there's a chance it won't turn out correctly. And one more. Great. And a pinch of salt. And a pinch of salt is something that you see in most baked goods because that little bit of saltiness helps bring out all the sweet flavors. I'm going to give it a quick pulse. Perfect. And now I can transfer it into my bigger work bowl. That's the nice thing about having a food processor with 2 work bowls, because you can save yourself some time. And I developed this dish for my friend Peter's birthday. It's kind of a tradition in my household to make something special for somebody's birthday. My mother would always make whatever our favorite dish was or whatever we were in the mood for that night, and there was always a homemade dessert. My brother would always get cherry cheesecake, and my sister would always do apple pie. And my mom's apple pie is famous among our family and friends. She piles it high. It's like a mile high with apples, and it's really delicious. So of course I was going to make something homemade for Peter's birthday. So for my wet ingredients, I'm combining 4 tablespoons of maple syrup with 4 tablespoons of melted butter. And I like to keep the ingredients wet like this because, first of all, they're really high quality ingredients. To use maple syrup versus using white sugar, you get a lot more minerals, and it makes it a lot easier if you can combine them together before you pour them in. So I'm going to pulse it in with my food processor running. Make sure to get all the bits that stick in here because, like I said, this is chemistry and you don't want to miss out on any bit because it could just make the difference. Now that my ingredients are completely combined, I'm going to press it into my pre-buttered tart shell. So here's my pan. I'm just going to use my spatula to scrape this in because this dough is really sticky and you don't want it to stick to your hands. Get that right there. And the other trick for pressing this is to keep your hands wet when you're working with it, because otherwise it's going to stick to your fingers. So I always keep a bowl of water right next to me when I go to press this shell. And try and press it as even as you can, because if you have areas that are thicker and thinner, they won't bake at the same rate. Beautiful. Okay, just going to rinse my hands off really quickly and then take this to the oven. I'm going to bake it at 350 degrees for 20 minutes until it's golden brown, and you'll see it right along the edges. Then I'm going to pull it out and give it a chance to cool completely before we fill it with our ganache. To make my ganache, I'm going to use 3/4 cup of heavy cream and 1 12-ounce bag of white chocolate chips. Traditionally, ganache is done with heavy cream, but if you want to make this dish vegan, all you have to do is substitute almond milk for the heavy cream, and it's just as good. So I'm going to pour this into a small saucepan because we have to heat it up. The heat from the warm heavy cream is what's going to melt our chocolate chips. And I want to put this on a low heat because milk can burn really easily. So I put it on a low heat, make sure my pot is positioned correctly, and I'm going to keep an eye on it because, as I said, since it burns easily, what you want to watch for are small bubbles right along the outside edge of the cream where it touches the pan. When you see those bubbles, you know it's warm enough. My cream is warm, so I'm just going to pour it over my white chocolate chips, and I want to get it over as much surface as I can. And whisk it. You want to whisk it quickly because the milk starts to cool as soon as you pour it out of the pot, and you're counting on it to melt all of your chocolate chips. Something really fun about making ganache is you don't just have to use dairy and chocolate. You can make it any flavor you want. I've done this tart with orange extract before if I don't have any fresh fruit on hand, like the raspberries we're going to use later, and it's great. All right, we're just about smooth here. We want it to look really creamy and velvety because all of the chips need to dissolve completely. Beautiful. And now that we're completely finished melting our chocolate chips, the next step is to cool our ganache because we're going to whip it with a hand mixer, but you can't do that until it's cooled down a bit. So pop it in the refrigerator for a couple of hours and you should be in good shape. A great trick, if you don't have a couple hours to let your ganache cool in the refrigerator, is to put it in an ice bath. And what I did was I just put a lot of ice into a larger bowl, added some water, and then placed my ganache bowl inside of it. And by whisking it, the outside edges get really cool from the ice bath, and it gets redistributed into the rest of the ganache. This will bring your temperature down pretty quickly. That way you don't have to wait on it in the refrigerator. My ganache is cooled, so what I'm going to do is use my hand mixer to whip some air into it. And if you remember correctly, we used heavy cream to make this. And when you whip heavy cream, you get whipped cream. So a similar thing is going to happen with our ganache. It's going to lighten in color, lighten in texture, and get really creamy and airy, and that's what you want to look for. See the difference in color there? That's what you want. And now I'm going to pour it into my cool tart shell. And because it's liquidy, it does a pretty good job of evening itself out. You don't have to worry too much about spreading it. You may want to just give your tart pan a little shake to get it all the way to each of the corners. Oh, I'm so excited. Great. Now, the finishing touch are the raspberries. And you can decorate it any way that you want. If you want to do some kind of special design, if you have artistic ability, go for it. You can do a name, or you can just do concentric circles, star shapes, whatever you want. Last one, right in the center. Perfect. And now what you want to do is transfer your tart into the refrigerator because you want to let it cool completely before you cut into it. So if you can do it overnight, that's best. And it's nice to do it that far in advance because when you have people over for something like this, you usually have a lot more to do than just make your dessert. If you can't do it overnight, 5 hours will do the trick, if you can wait that long to eat it. It's time to get started on the protein portion of our meal. And for our protein, I've chosen to use French lentils. When you buy them dry at the grocery store, they're a really dark color. They almost look like they're black. But once you've soaked them, they're a gorgeous bright green. And the reason I like to soak my lentils in advance is because, first of all, it makes them cook a lot faster, so that's always a benefit. But also, it makes them easier to digest, and that's a really key thing when you're thinking about serving beans and lentils to people. Also, the nutrients are more easily incorporated into the body if you've given them some time to soak. So I've soaked these lentils for 4 hours, and I'm gonna add them to my saucepan. I'm using a large saucepan because I need to make sure to give these lentils a lot of room to move around while they're boiling. I'm also going to add, for a bit of flavor, 1 bay leaf and 1 clove of garlic. I'm going to put the garlic in whole, but I'm going to smash it first to release the juices. Slide that out of the way. 1 good smash, that's all it takes. Peel the garlic clove and add it to your pot. So I'm going to add a lot of water in here so that it has enough room to move around and get it on the stovetop. Before I bring my lentils to a boil, it's important to remember to season them first. I'm using high-quality sea salt to season my water, and the reason I like to do that before I get them cooking is because if you season at the end, the salt mostly just stays on top of the lentils, but if you season it at the beginning while it has time to cook, it absorbs the water and the salt and makes them a lot more flavorful. So I'm just going to add a couple generous spoonfuls into my saucepan, and then cover it and bring it to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, I'm going to reduce it to a simmer and give it about 20 to 30 minutes to cook. You might want to check it to see how long it takes because you don't want them to be too mushy, otherwise they won't hold up well in the salad. To season my lentils, I'm going to make a vinaigrette, and this is a pretty traditional thing to do when you make a bean salad. So to start, I'm going to use balsamic vinegar. And using an acid like vinegar or lemon juice is a classic component of any vinaigrette. So I'm going to start with a 1/4 cup of balsamic vinegar. And the ratio of vinegar to olive oil is 1 to 2. So when I get to my olive oil, I'm going to use 1/2 cup. Before I get there, I'm going to season this with some dried tarragon. It's nice to use a dried herb to give your vinaigrette a little bit more flavor. And tarragon doesn't get used that frequently. People usually choose to use oregano or thyme, but I like the minty flavor and the sweetness that you get from tarragon. So I've got 1 tablespoon of dried tarragon. I'm going to give it a quick whisk to combine, and then the 1/2 cup of olive oil. And I want to drizzle it slowly while I'm whisking because, as you know, oil and vinegar don't mix. So we've got to kind of force it to emulsify. I always make homemade vinaigrettes in my household. My husband won't even let me buy vinaigrettes anymore. He always asks me to make something special for him. I can smell the tarragon already. It's fresh and minty and a little bit like basil. Great. And then you always want to season your vinaigrette. And when I say season, I mean salt and pepper. So I'm going to use some freshly ground black pepper and a generous pinch of salt. Whisk that in. And now the fun part. And this is actually the most important thing when you make a homemade vinaigrette. You want to taste it with something that you're going to serve it with. Because if you just taste it by itself with a spoon, it's likely that it's just going to taste bland or flat, or there's no way to know how it stands up with the other ingredients. So I'm going to dip a little piece of baby arugula. A little bit more salt, but the flavors are great. Okay, I'm going to set this aside. When my lentils are done, I'm going to pour it over top while they're still warm. My lentils have finished cooking, so the next step is to pour my vinaigrette over my lentils while they're still warm. Because while they're warm, they'll absorb more of the vinaigrette and give it lots more flavor. So I'm just going to quickly mix this one more time, because like I said, oil and vinegar separates, we all know that. And I'm gonna pour it on top of my lentils. When I stir it, I want to be careful not to break up the lentils too much because you want them to stay intact for a salad. So just kind of start on the outside and pull it in. Great, quick mix like that and it's all set. The only thing that's left is to make our wilted baby arugula. And I like to use baby greens because they're a little bit sweeter and not quite as bitter as their larger counterpoints. So that's why I chose baby arugula. And I'm gonna use 1 clove of garlic and mince that to saute and give lots of flavor to our arugula. So just a quick mince. That looks good. I'm gonna transfer it into my bowl and take it over to the stovetop so I can get it in my hot saute pan. The first thing I want to do is make sure that my saute pan gets nice and hot. So just want to make sure to give it a chance to get warm before you add your olive oil. And then your olive oil heats up a lot quicker too. So I'm going to pour my olive oil into the base of the pan. And just give it a little tilt to cover all the places that it didn't get. So when your olive oil is hot, you want to add your garlic. And you have to keep an eye on garlic because it burns really quickly. So you just want to get it a little bit golden brown right along the edges. And that's when we're going to pour it on top of our arugula. It may take a minute, but you want to keep an eye on it. Golden brown right along the edges, that's what I'm looking for. I'm going to turn my heat off and pour this on top of my arugula. Give it a quick toss with some tongs because you want to give the hot oil a chance to cover as many of the leaves as you can. And this is a nice way to wilt greens instead of adding the greens to the pan. This way, they kind of keep their texture a bit more, which is nice for a salad. Our arugula is wilted, our lentils are seasoned, and it's time to put it together. I like to start with a bed of wilted arugula on the base of my plate. Occasionally, you might get an extra green in there if you buy them in bulk. But that's okay, they're all delicious. And then top it with a nice generous scoop of your seasoned lentils. Our arugula was warm and so are our lentils, and this dish is delicious when it's warm. But if you don't have a chance to eat it right away, it's also really good cold. So whenever you have the time, you have a great, delicious protein and vegetable meal ready for you. The last component of our meal is our whole grain. And I'm using purple jasmine rice. This is a really unique grain. It's actually a mixture of jasmine rice and this purple rice, which is an heirloom grain from Thailand. And the color is so unique, most people actually haven't seen it in the States, and they save it for special occasions and celebrations in Thailand. So to be able to purchase it here is a real treat. It's really unique and really beautiful. To make our pilaf, I'm going to start with my aromatics. And aromatics are the base flavors that you use in your dish. I'm going to use 1 small white onion and 2 cloves of garlic. So I want to dice my onion really small, as small as I can, because I don't want the onion itself to stick out with the small grains of rice. Make a couple lateral cuts here to start. And I developed this dish for some friends of mine who actually happen to be the people who distribute this rice. I was sitting at a restaurant in San Francisco, and it was one of those restaurants where they have long communal tables, and we happened to be sitting at the same table and struck up a conversation about what we were eating. And I explained to them that I was a chef, and they explained to me that they sold all kinds of fair trade products, including quinoa and grains like this. So we really hit it off, and then about a week later, I got this box full of these gorgeous products, and they don't just make this purple rice, they've got red rice and black rice. So as a thank you, I wanted to make them a little treat with this, and that's how this dish was born, the purple rice pilaf, as a thank you to Alter Eco. So I'm just gonna dice my last onion. Perfect, and then 2 cloves of garlic, and these I'm gonna mince. Give them a quick smash. I think it's great to include a grain like this in your meal because whole grains really satisfy you, and they have lots of great minerals in them. And as I said before, when you're thinking about getting vegetarian protein in your diet, it's good to consider what makes a complete protein. And since you need to pair a whole grain like rice with lentils or beans to get a complete protein, it seems like such a natural choice to do something with a little bit more flavor, like a pilaf. All right, now I'm going to transfer these into a bowl so I can take them over to my stovetop and saute them. So I've got some water boiling in the back here, and the first thing I'm going to do is get my aromatics sauteing. So I'm going to start with a hot pan, add some olive oil. And it's the same thing that you had with the arugula. You want to give the olive oil a chance to get warm before you add your garlic and your onions. So make sure to give it a minute. I'm going to add my aromatics with a pinch of salt because the salt will help draw out the moisture in the vegetables and it assists in the cooking process. It's called sweating the onions. And then, to give this dish its signature flavor, I'm going to use fennel seed. And a lot of people are hesitant with fennel. People tend to give it a bad rap. They're not a fan of the flavor. But actually, it's all about balance. And the thing that works in this dish is because we're going to add Parmesan, which is salty and nutty, the sweetness of this fennel pairs really beautifully. And also, the aromatic qualities of jasmine rice are definitely going to pull it together. So I'm going to saute these with my onion and garlic just to kind of bloom it and give it some more flavor. And the last ingredient are purple rice. So this purple rice has been rinsed and drained, and you want to rinse your rice first. It's important to make sure that you don't have any dirt or residue on it. So I rinse it, drain it, and then transfer it into a bowl. This is actually what makes this dish a pilaf. The thing that distinguishes cooking rice regularly and making it a pilaf is the sauteing process. When you saute the rice in olive oil or butter first, it coats the outsides of the grains, makes them more individualized, and it really adds richness to the dish. So that is why this is pilaf. Just give it about a minute so that it can saute, really have each grain coated with the olive oil before you add your boiling water. One more stir. All right, so I had 1 cup of rice, and the ratio is about 1 to 2. It's actually exactly 1 3/4. So I'm going to add 1 3/4 cup of boiling water. just a smidge more. That'll do it. So, give it a stir, and then you're going to cover it and bring it to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, you want to reduce it to a simmer and let it cook for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes are up, I like to turn it off and leave it covered for an extra 5 minutes to steam it a little bit more. It doesn't overcook the grains, but it makes sure that they're not too crunchy and they're just the right texture. My rice is finished cooking, my lentil salad is ready, and so is my tart. And all that's left before we can eat this delicious meal is to grate the Parmesan and finish up the rest of this pilaf. So in my bowl, I have 1 cup of petite peas that I've defrosted. It only takes about an hour if you want to put it into your refrigerator, and add it to this bowl. I'm going to grate some Parmesan on top. And it's the Parmesan that's going to add lots of saltiness and nuttiness and also make this dish really creamy. The cheese, when it melts over the rice, is amazing. So I want to grate about 1 cup of Parmesan into my dish. Good grated cheese is worth waiting for. All right, and now I'm going to pour the hot rice on top of the cheese and peas. And the heat from the rice is going to melt the cheese, warm up the peas, and pull this all together. Give it a quick toss. Look how great those colors are. That's actually how I chose to use peas in this, because purple and green are opposite of each other on the color wheel, so I thought that it would really just make this dish pop. So I'm going to transfer it into a serving bowl and top it with a little more cheese, because it's pretty and it's delicious. Just a quick little grate right on top. A little salt and pepper. And we're ready to serve.